This is Proxy Countdown. Welcome to the big show for the week of June 9th, 2025. Alongside my tag team partner, Matt Moscardi, good start. I'm Damian Rollis, and today's countdown, rewarding cheating CFOs, a new way to circumvent the alternative democracy, an ISS and Glass Lewis battle of the wits at Penn Entertainment, a Jay Hoag sized shareholder hole at Netflix, and on the big vote, Matt takes a closer look at director attendance. Do I have that right? Let's go to our top stories. I don't have a ton of top stories this week. I'm looking at a couple of trends. Let's start with the money. To keep working, they're going to keep their jobs. The named executive officers at Capital One Financial get a total of $43 million in time vesting equity. That's just stock, basically, in recognition of their ongoing and anticipated work, essentially, including a whopping $30 million for CEO and Chair Richard Fairbank. So Capital One is integrating with Discover, so I guess they're getting extra money because
they're getting pre-bonuses.
They're doing something extra, which probably still
I would have thought this was their job.
Yeah, it's their job. It's their job.
It's their job.
Okay, here's the money to walk in the door. There's a golden hello to walk in the door. Newly hired Roblox CFO Naveen Chopra gets $6 million in cash, $28 million in equity, $15,000 a month for temporary housing until August 2026, and $900,000 for relocation expenses.
Where is Roblox located?
San Mateo, California. I actually did look up the rental market there. He's going to have a very nice place. Corpay's new CFO, Peter Walker, gets $8 million in equity and relocation expenses, despite bailing on his last job at Instructure in less than 2 years. So he only lasted 2 years. And I ask you, is this like marrying the guy who was cheating on his wife when you started dating him? Isn't that kind of what it is?
Wow. Well, that's even a confusing question.
Yeah, but why are we throwing money at people who leave their jobs in less than 2 years? I just don't really understand that.
Well, this is the best way to get them to stay around, isn't it? Isn't it a retention bonus? Isn't that what it's supposed to do?
And then finally, to walk out the door, Texas Roadhouse CFO Chris Monroe is waving the white flag after less than 2 years of the job and still gets $1 million. So he didn't do it. He didn't accomplish anything. He screwed up. He failed. He gets $1 million.
Do we have any stories in which someone stayed in a place for more than 2 years?
What's weird to me is that we've been doing this show for so long that I say he got $1 million, and I'm like, oh, that seems low, even though
it seems quaint.
Clearly not low.
It's a quaint number.
And then finally, we're tracking new ways companies are circumventing the alternative democracy. These aren't new, but they're new. It's a new thing I'm tracking. So this is proxy season, right? A lot of companies are holding their annual meetings now. So that would be the opportune time to have shareholders elect new directors. But here's what's going on. International Flavors and Fragrances adds Virginia Drosos to the board, as well as to 3 board committees only 1 month after their annual meeting in May. Same with the Hartford Insurance Group. They, quote-unquote, elected Thomas Bartlett just a month after their meeting and immediately appointed him to 2 board committees. And then finally, at American Water Works, they didn't even wait a month before increasing the size of the board to 9 members and appointing Rafiq Nathoo to the board and also 3 other board committees. So this is a new way of doing it, right? Just wait for the meeting to end and then just put someone on the board.
It's a legitimate trend because we actually looked at this in a show last year and went backwards to figure out how many times, like what's the average number of days between when a director is appointed and when they are actually elected at the annual meeting. And at the time, it was like 2 to 3 months. Now we're talking about 11 months on the job with virtually totally vested stock. They would get fired with a month left to deliberate whether or not to accept the resignation, which would vest all of their options. So they get fully paid for a year on the board before they even got elected, basically. It is definitely a thing that's happening. I'm glad you're watching this.
Moving over to our proxy cage matches. Here's we've covered this proxy season. I like this one. Penn Entertainment shareholders are getting conflicting messages from ISS and Glass Lewis on how to vote on activist investor HG Vora's 3 dissident nominees. So ISS and HG Vora are saying yes to all 3 nominees, while Penn, the company, and Glass Lewis are saying no only to former Penn CFO William Clifford, who was there for 13 years. This kind of reminds me of the Disney proxy cage match, right? Where they're trying to put their old CFO.
Or even it's United Health, right? We're just boomeranging people from 10 years ago back onto the board, whether the CFO, CEO, whatever.
So there's some funny parts to this proxy cage match. Penn is saying that they actually shrunk their board from 9 to 8 members, so don't even bother trying. They're saying there's not even a board seat for the third person, so you can't try to put a third, which is
clever.
Ludicrous.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the courts will decide this one because Clifford is running anyway, and he's running unopposed, so if he gets 1 vote, which he will, he's technically going to be elected to the board, so we'll see what the courts decide on this one. So let's get to the opinions. ISS said, now ISS, remember, is they are for all 3 dissident nominees. They said the board lacks an adequate level of direct gaming industry experience.
Interesting.
It appears that this deficiency, I love that they're calling it deficiency, has hampered the board's ability to effectively oversee management, especially during the push into interactive games. And there is little evidence that the board has been able to hold management accountable, which suggests that a director who is not afraid to share a contrarian viewpoint may be a valuable addition. Now, this is confusing on so many levels. First of all, they should be applying this metric to every company they cover. Second of all, it is kind of odd that the former executive, the former CFO, is the one applying the contrarian
with the contrarian viewpoint. Yeah,
but there's just a lot that's interesting here. And again, what they're really putting a flag in is that it's important who you elect to the boards, right? Isn't that really what they're saying? I mean, it's really important to scrutinize each and every member of the board.
I would agree with that if there was any consistency. I mean, we've talked about this ad nauseum. They'll say it when there's an activist involved, but if you apply the same logic and reasoning across all boards, there are hundreds, thousands even, that are compromised in all the same ways. So are we really bringing a focus on it, or are we really just picking a side because maybe HG Vora hired ISS to do an assessment, or maybe, ISS doesn't like the Penn chair, or it just seems like because it's so random and because it's so unevenly applied, I don't know that it does the thing, which is to bring focus to who's on the board, so much as it does the thing to bring focus to ISS's sort of potential compromise of their own in assessing boards,
or their inability to assess boards.
Sure, that's what I mean by compromise. Data. Like, they don't have enough people to assess all the boards, so they only do it on the activist
Or they don't have
ones.
the data set.
Or they don't have a data set, or Paul, knows the chair of this board, but not the chair of that board. Like, I don't really get it because it's so uneven. You end up in a situation where you have to speculate what is real. If you had the data to do this analysis on this board at Penn Entertainment, get the data to do it everywhere, and you can make this assessment clean.
What's also interesting is that the ISS comes right out and says the board lacks an adequate level of direct gaming industry experience, end of sentence, and yet does not suggest voting against any of the sitting directors.
Not to mention that the number of boards that we see that lack direct core knowledge of the industry in which they're on, for the companies on which they sit, is all of them. Basically all of them.
So Glass Lewis disagrees with ISS. They say that they believe certain aspects of the former CFO Clifford's profile may overlap with existing or anticipated members of the board. Now, again, this is odd because we see so many boards with several current or former CFOs. So there's always this overlap. The board's Glass Lewis goes on to say the board's assertion that his background is not sufficiently differentiated and its unanimous decision not to support him despite backing two other dissident nominees raises questions as to whether he would bring distinctive value at this time. That is just so convoluted. So because
the board doesn't want them, he should be there. That's what.
Yeah, which
is that what they're saying? Like, because they ask for the opposite, we should do the opposite of the opposite.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very confusing. I don't understand the logic here.
And what would be the harm? So they're basically citing him as a contrarian. What would be the harm of a contrarian viewpoint in a boardroom of about 8 or 9 people? What would be the harm?
I don't understand this at all, any more than I understand. Like Andrew Whitty and Stephen Hemsley were on the board together, and Hemsley was the CEO of United. There was overlap between people. Is overlap now a standard? Because we've already pointed out that there are companies with 4 former executives on the board of the company, and nobody bats an eye. Or do you mean overlap in terms of board interlocks? Because on average, 20 to 30% of every U.S. board is connected to one another through another board. So and then the reverse logic of, because someone doesn't like someone, maybe they should be on the board. Like, I don't understand that. I don't understand any of the analysis.
It gets even a little bit more confusing because now the company itself, Penn Entertainment, said that the former CFO demonstrated antiquated views of a rapidly changing industry. Now, combine that with the fact that ISS, who agrees with Penn, says that the whole board at Penn Entertainment lacks gaming industry experience. So it's a little confusing. So ISS is saying the whole board lacks experience. Penn is saying that's important. That if someone lacks experience, that's important. So that I'm just confused. Like, when is it important that you have industry experience? When is it important that you don't? The whole thing really makes my head spin.
They know that 4 of the members of the board are 70 years or older, right? Like, so if you're talking about antiquated experience, wouldn't you evenly apply that to people who are,
especially in a rapidly evolving betting industry. I mean, the betting industry has not gone under such rapid changes forever. I mean, really, I can't think of a time that's more important to adopt.
I love that the company is fighting against their own ex-CFO.
It's nuts.
And saying things like, because he didn't adopt a loyalty program in 2014 and it became lucrative later, that he doesn't know what he's doing. He was the CFO, correct?
Yes. Well,
not the CEO.
He just wasn't a fan. He wasn't a fan of the program. But that's the thing. This is what it's telling me, is that it is important.
What are we doing?
It's important to isolate each member of the board and to kind of articulate their positions, to kind of go over their record, right? To come up with a quantifiable data set to how they're performing. But yet we only do it in these rare occasions. Do we do it?
You know what I love about this? First of all, I wish that Penn's CEO and all the Penn board members would have to actually stand up and do campaign speeches, because this effectively is, someone at Penn coming out and saying, Clifford, you had your chance, and when you had your chance, you passed on this lucrative program that has been huge for our company. We really think you should vote against Clifford joining this board. It sounds like a campaign speech. Put them all up on stage, get all the information about all their positions, policy positions, economic positions, and let them duke it out, and then let investors vote. I don't understand anymore because the analytics at ISS and Glass Lewis they come to the opposite conclusion. They come to conclusions because somebody didn't like a thing that you should do that thing because they don't like it. What are we doing? This is what this actually is a scream in the night for data about board members.
Yes.
It's not even
freefloatanalytics.com.
because you cannot trust anything that they're saying. That like they're giving you nothing except their sort of intuition, and they don't apply it evenly because they don't have the staff or data to do it. Just go to freefloatanalytics.com. You can get half the data right there.
Yeah, I was going to say, and yet they're getting paid a great amount for their so-called expertise. Let's move on to Victoria's Secret. Activist investor BBRC Worldwide, which controls 13% of the company, that's pretty big, is yelling at the company's board for quote, failing to adequately demonstrate meaningful accountability despite clear evidence of boardroom lapses. They're specifically targeting insufficient board independence and excessive chair tenure. I like that, excessive chair tenure. They're looking at Donna James, who has been the board chair for 2 decades, and they're saying, rather than waiting for a proxy contest, how about the board of Victoria's Secret just kick her out right now and refresh the board?
BBRC, have you ever looked at tenure? Like the number of directors that have been on a board for 20 or more years. Again, this is not a proxy advisor, but it's an investor applying a logic that you could easily apply for every company in the United States, most of Europe, not the UK, because they have a 10-year cap on tenure before you're not independent anymore. But like, this applies to so many directors.
And you are not allowed to have a non-independent chair. So she couldn't even be she could be a director, a non-independent director, but the UK would not let her sit in the chair role because she's been there for over.
Meanwhile, we have lead independent directors in the US who have been there for 20 plus years by themselves.
Who we're going to highlight later, Jay Hoag at Netflix. Finally, BBRC also addressed the recent cybersecurity incident. So Victoria's Secret was actually taken offline a few weeks ago, I believe, maybe last week, for several days. It was such a problem that they're delaying their first quarter results. So they're BBRC is saying that this is an event that Victoria's Secret may have been preventable with proper precautions, meaning that the board should have been ready for this. Now here's the story. Here's their board in a nutshell. Here's what BBRC is talking about, I guess, although I don't know why they're not suggesting their own nominees if this is the case. But the audit committee has the mandate of overseeing cybersecurity risk at Victoria's Secret. There are 4 members of the audit committee. Only one of the members has a skill called cybersecurity oversight, although even that's a little bit loose because she's the former CFO at Foot Locker. Other than her, there is no other director who has listed cybersecurity oversight. So, again, I don't know why the BBRC isn't suggesting that we add directors with cybersecurity experience. I don't really know what's going on, but my main takeaway here is that they're right to look at the board. They're right to scrutinize director skill sets, director experience. This is the right
I
path.
agree, but that they're also betraying the fact that investors don't, right? Because
yes, unfortunately.
if you are going to say that the cybersecurity incident might have been preventable and the board lacks cybersecurity experience on it, if that is going to be part of your argument, then how do you explain the fact that Clorox, after their massive 2023 data breach that shut down production, actually the director receiving the lowest votes that year got 94.5% of the investor vote? People know that this is an issue. They know you need directors who have that sort of background or knowledge, and yet no one actually does an assessment or votes that way. So I don't really get it. There's such a big gap between what happens and what they say should happen when it comes to an activist being involved.
Well, hopefully shareholders are paying attention because there is a clear target if you want to voice your discontent, because Sarah Davis is the chair of that audit committee. She's also the lowest performing board member according to our metrics. So if you're going to hold anyone accountable, it should be the chair of the committee that has the mandate to oversee cybersecurity risks. So there you go. So let's move over to our vote results table. There's not a lot here to talk about, unfortunately. So I looked at 41 large cap U.S. companies. Again, I look at a subset of roughly the 600 largest companies by market cap in the U.S. Out of those 41 meetings, the trend continues. There are so few shareholder proposals this year. It's incredible. Only 21 out of that group, and 12 of those shareholder proposals came from just two companies, Walmart and Netflix.
What? Walmart being a controlled company, people. What's the point?
Well, I'm glad you point that out, because the pointlessness of a shareholder proposal at Walmart is clear when you look at the voting results. All seven got between 0.37% support and 7% support, which is extremely low. I mean, and you're right, it's because of the Walton family's holding. So it is curious, like why target Walmart?
You know, it paints everything in, like it lets you know that this is performative. Shareholder proposals are non-binding and they are performative. Even when you're doing it at a company where it isn't controlled, the fact that we see routinely shareholder proposals, the most proposals are filed at places like Walmart, at Meta, at Amazon, which isn't controlled, but Bezos owns 15 or 16% of the shares. Like, we see routinely the bulk of shareholder proposals going towards companies that have a founder involved or have some sort of control mechanism. Means you just issue a press release if you don't like what the company's doing. Like, this is effectively a press release.
41 meetings, only one shareholder win, I suppose, overall. Simple majority voting shareholder proposal passed at HubSpot, getting 51% of the vote. Other than that, the typical shareholder disconnects we keep seeing, like as an example, at Devon Energy, 35% no on pay, which is a very high figure. Yet the lowest director got only 6% against their reelection. And then just like the oddities of the shareholder oddities in general, like I'm looking at the call a special shareholder meeting. Shareholder proposal. We see that one a lot by either John Chevedden or Jim McRitchie. At PayPal, it got 44% support. At Devon Energy, it got 8% support. I just don't know.
Maybe they forgot how to read by the time they got to Devon.
But let's cover the only real compelling story this week, and that's Netflix. So at Netflix, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who's actually carefully looked at shareholder votes at Netflix over the past basically like 15 years. So lead independent director, which I say, with a wink in a giggle. Lead independent director Jay Hoag, who has been on the board since 1999, right? Since the Clinton administration.
Since the end of the Clinton year.
Essentially along for the ride with Reed Hastings. I think Reed Hastings joined 2 years earlier, but somehow he's still the lead independent director. He received a whopping 78% votes against at the meeting this week. I don't know if I can't remember seeing a bigger vote against a director, especially such a high-profile director at a high-profile company. Now, the short-term story is this, and this is the aggravating part of the story that, Matt, I know you're going to cover in great detail on the big vote coming up. But the key takeaway as to why is that he failed attendance. So
yes.
The quote from the PROXY, the board held 4 meetings during 2024. Each board member attended at least 75% of the aggregate meetings, except for Jay Hoag, who attended half. Now, I will say that that's already an exceptionally low amount of board meetings. 4. In fact, he also is the chair of the nominating committee, and they only had 2 meetings, I believe, and I don't think he went to those meetings either. So again, this is what shareholders seized upon. This will be the story as to why he lost his vote. But before you get to your section, Matt, I just wanted to recap the somewhat recent history of shareholder voting at Netflix. So tracking back to, I was tracking the votes against Jay Hoag since about 2010. Now, the first problem is that this board was classified for well over a couple of decades. They finally reversed that in 2022. So now you can vote against Jay Hoag every year, because the reality is that this is not the first time he's lost an election. He actually lost it in 2020 as well with 55% against. He nearly lost in 2017 with 49%, 2014, 49.7%. But since the resignation policy, they have a majority vote policy there, which means that you have to tender your resignation to the board, but the board can then decide what it wants to do with the resignation. It doesn't have to accept the resignation. So Jay Hoag is not going to go anywhere. But here's the bigger backdrop that I wanted to point out. This is there is no other company like this. Every year, starting in 2011, there has been at least one, if not two, shareholder proposals that wins a vote at Netflix. So starting in 2011, a majority voting policy won with 72% of the vote. The next year, a vote to repeal the classified board won. In 2013, there were 4 wins: majority voting policy, simple majority vote, repeal classified board vote, even a vote to have an independent board chair, all with at least 73% votes in support. And year after year, this kept happening. Year after year, the board just completely ignored the shareholder. This was why Jay Hoag initially started getting votes against. And then it kind of all went away. In 2022, the company finally acquiesced, and they agreed to declassify the board. They agreed to eliminate supermajority voting. And then shareholders kind of stopped noticing until the attendance policy came up this year, and now people are mad again at Jay Hoag. So, Matt, I don't really know how to summarize this other than that this is a extremely long and convoluted history of strange shareholder votes at Netflix, usually ending where the board completely ignores the will of the shareholder.
Well, let's summarize it this way with something that you pulled from 2017 when you got 49% no. So the way to think about Jay Hoag is every year he's been up for election until 2021-ish, when they are 2022, when they declassified the board. Every year he was almost voted out or voted out. I mean, it was 49%. 49.7%. It was 55% no, and then they declassify the board, and then people stopped paying attention. Except that in 2017, when you got 49% no, you pulled this quote lead. I'm not even sure where you pulled this from.
This is from a shareholder proposal, I believe, from John Chevedden.
It says lead director Jay Hoag's long tenure and the fact that he was an early investor in Netflix may compromise his independence. Right. That does not stop being true when they declassify the board. In fact, that was in 2017.
8 years ago.
8 years ago, when he was still the lead independent director, which he is today after 25 years. Last year, he got 9% no. The real question here is, did investors lose their memory? Because this was a director that ignored you for 22 of his 25 years on the board. He ignored everything you said. He was long tenured. He was not independent. And then you got the declassified board. You had the ability to vote him out. And instead, you take the next 2 years to ignore voting him out entirely until this year.
Yeah, when
he failed attendance.
Well, here's the thing too, and I didn't even cover this because there's just such an overwhelming amount of data on this company, is that in 2021, shareholders actually said yes to a political disclosures proposal. They said yes in 2022 to a lobbying activity report. They also rejected pay. 73% said no in 2022. 71% said no in 2023. So even after they changed, they declassified the board, they're still ignoring shareholders. And so that former protest vote against Jay Hoag, it should never go away, essentially, because they continue to ignore. And they're going to ignore them another time this year because he's not going to resign, right? So
until the day where the overwhelming vote against him didn't come because he was ignoring you for 25 years. It came because he only attended 50% of his meetings. That's when it came. Which is what I want to spend my time on the big vote talking about.
Let's segue out of this because I'm overwhelmed by Netflix's shareholder record. It's pretty incredible.
All right. So for the big vote today, all I'm looking at is attendance, which is by far the stupidest of indicators. As far as I can tell, attendance is one of the primary drivers of director fail votes. It's either attendance or activist investing.
And I was going to say, before we even launch into this, what's truly ironic here is that that to use that as your only indicator belies the experience that Jay Hoag actually has. So if you like Jay Hoag in the first place, you're not going to find more institutional knowledge at Netflix other than Reed Hastings. So you're going to penalize him for missing a board meeting. I think the dude who sleeps and breathes Netflix for the last 25 years probably knows Netflix so well that you could have handed him a notebook and with the notes of that board meeting he missed. So that's the reason is just a little bit strange.
Let's pause on the fact that what a laughably low bar it is to set 75% attendance at meetings as your red line cut off. That's it. We're voting against you. Forget it. Because while it is comical that in 2025, all you have to do, you could literally be in the bathroom of an airplane on Zoom with the camera off and muted, and it counts as having attended.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that hard to hit that goal, but even having that as a goal is, that's it. We just want you to be there, even if you're not listening, even if you're not... It is a laughably low bar.
And as far as we can tell, and correct us if we're wrong, I know we have listeners who work in these industries, and I'm looking at you, Glass Lewis and ISS. Correct us if I'm wrong. This is the only measurable data point that actually causes action, right? Because there's no other, you have no other systematic way of saying no other than this one data point. So go ahead.
The thing that strikes me about it actually is that while it causes action, it still causes less action than you think. In last year, in our data of U.S. large cap company directors, about 550 companies, 4,700 directors-ish, there were only 9 directors who were up for a vote and not part of like an excluded class, like a classified board vote. It was like a non-controlled companies. There were 9 directors that failed attendance. You're talking about 4,700 chances to fail attendance, and it only happened 9 times out of 4,700 to begin with. And that includes 2 directors who were excused from meetings for medical reasons.
I was going to add, I've seen that in the past. I've seen instances where there's been an excuse for medical reason, and ISS and Glass Lewis have clearly looked the other way because they've gotten support from shareholders.
Which, fine, medical reasons. We'll just
suppose.
I'm sure there's some very justifiable medical reasons.
How do we know that Jay Hoag didn't have a reason that he didn't want to share? It's just highly personal. Who
I
knows?
actually read one of these that said they did not attend multiple board meetings for personal reasons.
Right. So is that
personal, private reasons?
Does that count? Is that the same as medical? I don't know. Who knows?
But I do know that there were 7 chances outside of the medical ones for investors to register their disgust with director attendance. And this is, again, directors, all they have to do is sign into Zoom and put it on mute. These are people who, large cap companies. The average director pay, summary pay, is about $250,000 a year, right? So $250,000 a year. There's no reason why you really shouldn't be able to like find an hour to join the meeting. The results of these votes actually suggest that the Jay Hoag situation is unique because 0 of the votes failed.
Oh, so I had this wrong then. I had the assumption that Glass Lewis and ISS would automatically vote against. So the evidence suggests otherwise. They don't care.
The evidence suggests that investors care so little even about this that they don't bother voting against. So
that makes the Jay Hoag story all the more confusing.
It's totally confusing because there's nothing new about Jay Hoag's situation except the failure of attendance that will drive the vote.
Because let's not forget, last year he got 91% support.
In fact, in 2024, the lowest vote was actually 63% for. And at Monster Beverage, Tiffany Hall, who failed attendance, got 99.67% of the vote, despite failing attendance.
Now, did she fail for medical reasons?
More than 99%.
Do we know?
What's that?
Was it for medical reasons? Do we know?
No, it was not for medical reasons. I read every single one of them. I went through every possible failed vote I could find, and then I looked through all of our data. 2 things are true about attendance of directors. Number 1, investors don't hold directors to even that barest minimum standard. They clearly, it is a red line, as in every single policy that I've ever read states that they will vote against directors who do not meet minimum attendance standard, 75% of meetings. And yet, those directors routinely do not get voted out. So that's number 1. Number 2, there are no votes against directors at scale unless an activist points out that they're compromised. That's pretty much it. Like, the only way you can get a negative vote is through an activist. That's the only consistent way you could do it, which makes the vote against Jay Hoag so bizarre and so jarring, because you listed, in the doc here, you have every single year, every single vote, every single result for Jay Hoag and then shareholder proposals. You're pulling quotes on it. He's been there for 25 years. He's still called quote unquote independent and the lead independent director. He's ignored investors for a decade, and the attendance vote put him over the edge. So here's what I wanted to do for this week, because this is such a ridiculous standard. This week, you get a chance to do something about attendance, because one company out of the 100 companies you pulled for this week, a large cap U.S. company called Vertiv Holdings, $27 billion market cap. They make infrastructure for like data centers, cooling, racks, enclosures, and stuff like that. They had this in their filing this year, their proxy this year. In the year ending December 31st, 2024, all but one member of our board of directors attended at least 75% of the aggregate meetings. Mr. Katsube attended 50% of the aggregate meetings of the board of directors and was not able to attend the balance due to last-minute emergencies and other extenuating circumstances. So no real detail, just couldn't do it. As further described herein, Mr. Katsube does not serve on any of our committees. This is a board that met 4 times as a board, and he attended only 2 of them, and he serves on 0 committees, and they did an aggregate attendance, meaning he was on no committees, which, the committees meet 4 to, the audit committee can meet up to 10 or 12 times a year. He didn't sit on any committees, so he missed 2 of the 4 meetings he had to get to. He got paid $510,550 in summary compensation for attending 2 meetings. Just in case you need to do the math, that's roughly $255,000 per meeting attended. And if you assume these meetings are 6 hours and it takes maybe a day to prep for them, he made over $18,000 an hour to attend the 2 meetings. That's one median Walmart employee is what he got paid to effectively show up just, for 2 hours at these board meetings. So you have an opportunity to vote against Jacob Katsube. He has 4% influence. He's on the Vertiv and Ryerson holding boards. 570 TSR, 451 on earnings. You have an opportunity to vote him out.
Which, if you're doing the Jay Hoag principle, you should.
Which, if you're doing Jay Hoag's principle, you should. But this is what it looks like if you actually applied more data than attendance.
Right.
The worst performer on the Vertiv board is Roger Frayden, 428 TSR, 471 earnings, 13% influence. He's connected to 30% of the board, including executive chair David Coate, or Cody Coate. He worked under Coate at Honeywell for more than a decade. He's not remotely independent. He's the worst performer. He's not remotely independent. In fact, David Coate is executive chair. He sat on the Business Roundtable. He sat on the Council for Foreign Relations. He's scout on the Economic Club of New York. He's very connected. He's a connected CEO. He's on the Compo Secure board with 2 board members from Vertiv. He is the executive chair of Compo Secure and Resolute Holdings, which he runs, which owns Compo Secure. Coate actually put his son John on the Compo Secure board.
Yeah.
Vertiv went public via SPAC, a Goldman-backed SPAC from 2018 to 2020, which is where you actually got Katsube. Katsube is a SPAC guy. In fact, the CEO of Vertiv, and I air quote CEO here, worked under a different board member, Edward Monser. Both worked at Emerson Electric when Monser was the CEO there, and Giordano Albertazzi, who's the CEO at Vertiv, was basically just like a sales guy.
Okay.
This board is just David Coates' personal playboard.
Right.
It's whoever he puts there, mixed with SPAC finance bros. Katsube and Matthew Louis on this board come from Platinum Equity. They both sponsored the SPAC. Jackie Hausler was from Opus Capital. Joe Van Dockum was from Imperative Science Ventures. They're all involved in the SPAC. This is a company that went public via SPAC in 2020. How many years should a SPAC board member sit on the board of the company? At some point, they're not adding value to the company at all. They're totally useless when it comes to what Vertiv does. They are financiers. They don't. In fact, engineering and technology is just 7% of overall influence. Only 3 directors even have it as background knowledge. Only 2 directors have production and processing as background knowledge. This is not a board whose core skill is making cooling equipment for data centers. One guy, Stephen Raymond, comes from retail food, and he's a dean at Wake Forest. This is a board that has virtually no skill in the thing that it does.
Yeah.
They serve at the pleasure of the executive chair, who puts them on multiple boards that he runs.
Right.
And you have a puppet CEO in place. So, yes, you could vote out Katsube just for the attendance failure. Or you could vote no on Coate, Frayden, and Katsube and say, we looked at multiple data points to assess a board that is compromised beyond belief and does not represent you, the shareholder, despite being 1 share, 1 vote, and despite being held largely by BlackRock and Vanguard like every other company.
Yeah, it would suggest that. Well, see, now I'm confused because I was operating under the assumption that a failed attendance did automatically trigger a no vote, but so I don't actually even know what happened at Netflix anymore. But it does suggest that if you look deeper at someone like Katsube, you don't need him on your board. But if you look deeper at Hoag, you probably do need him on your board, but you don't need him. You don't need him as a lead independent. He shouldn't be the lead independent director. We can agree on.
I don't think you need either. What I think you need is to assess beyond did they show up.
Yeah.
I think as soon as you start assessing beyond do they show up, you could name Leslie Kilgore's on the Netflix board. She should not be on that board. She worked under Reed Hastings.
Yeah.
Richard Barton actually was an early investor in Netflix. Also, he's been there almost as long as Jay Hoag. Why do you need Jay Hoag and Richard Barton and Leslie Kilgore?
Barton has gotten a lot of votes against too over his tenure. What
it makes no sense.
What it suggests to me mostly, again, in talking about Glass Lewis and ISS, is that they should have a list of at least 10 triggers, 10 flags, not just attendance, that says, okay, if this flag goes up, we're going to take a deeper look at this director. But we only really see this one flag that gets extra scrutiny. And before you move on, I want to make one small correction. The Monster Beverage director who failed attendance was actually someone named Mark Hall. There's two Halls. Although, so I thought maybe that could have made a difference, but his name is Mark Hall, not Tiffany Hall. And I looked at his vote, and he got 99.2%. So it's not. So he still got.
I had a mapping error.
You had a mapping error, but again, I'm definitely confused by this. I don't.
But
really
just
know
in
what
case,
to say.
just in case you are so fixated on attendance that you really need to vote against people with just failed attendance. Upcoming in the next couple of weeks, there are a couple more meetings that include. Skillsoft, their AGM's coming up in July. Larry Summers is on that board. He failed attendance.
Is that right?
But he's a Class 2 director, and it's Class 1 year. So sorry, you can't do anything about that. But you might want to, register your complaint there. How about Wilbur Ross, ex-Trump Commerce Secretary? He's at Koya Therapeutics. He failed attendance.
Really?
Also a Class 1 director and a Class 3 year. So you'll get your shot at him next year. And then Keurig Dr. Pepper, the board, here's what they wrote. Our board met 10 times during 2024. Each director, this is what they write that's clever. They write this sentence first. Each current director attended at least 75% of the total number of meetings of the board and committees on which such directors served that were held, with the exception of Mr. Michaels due to health reasons.
It's always that final clause. Yeah,
there was a health reasons clause for Keurig Dr. Pepper.
Well, now I want to pull data. I want to know if this is like a trend this year, because what we're seeing more and more is that shareholders are just more aligned with management in general. We're seeing this with the lack of shareholder proposals and diminished support for shareholder proposals. So I wonder if this attendance thing is just going away this year, or if this has always been the case. I always thought it was an automatic trigger. I'm not suggesting that it meant they were automatically voted out of the board, but at least that they would get substantial votes against, like at least 10 to 20% against. So I don't know.
And look, don't get me wrong. Like voting against, like it should be easy to attend 75% of the meetings when you get paid $500,000 a year to do it, right? I think that should be a trigger to look at the person who failed to get to the meetings and do an assessment. My problem is when you use blunt force instruments like did you go to a meeting as effectively your only tool or trigger, or one of very, very few tools or triggers to voting against a director. It isn't a protected class of human being. They are your effective employees as an investor. You have the right to choose, pick, vote yes, vote no. In fact, with proxy access, you can put your own directors on boards that are underperforming. Yet investors seem to think that anything against a human being is micromanaging. But these are your human beings. These aren't management's human beings. These are yours. They represent your interests, not management's interests. I don't understand why in any other facet of your life, you wouldn't allow an employee to stay on with the qualifications that some of these people have, the connections that some of them have, the compromised nature of the relationship they have. You wouldn't hire them. You wouldn't keep them on for 25 years. Jay Hoag would not have a job as middle management at your company if every time you asked him to do something, he was like, meh, maybe 10 years from now, I'll do that thing.
And let's not forget the overwhelming evidence that every time now we're seeing a contested election, an activist investor, Glass Lewis and ISS, they are finding deficiencies at almost every board.
Almost all of them.
So we know that these deficiencies exist everywhere. The other thing I was going to add is I'm always pushing for like the whole governance world in general, the ESG world, to stay creative, like keep the R&D going. We don't have to be happy with initiatives that occurred 2 and 3 decades ago. How about this? How about a failed attendance triggers a contested election, so that if a director fails attendance, how about he or she has to run against another director? How about that? At least give shareholders a choice in the matter, right?
I love that.
And if you want to articulate why you think the director who cannot bother to show up to a meeting is still valuable, fine, articulate it in the proxy. But then let shareholders have a contested election. Let them have the choice to say, hey, we need someone who, has this skill set, is a little younger, might not be sick, whatever it is, whatever reason they want. That would be a great
I'm 100% behind that. Yeah,
all right,
do it.
I'm assuming you have nothing else?
No, oh my God.
That's plenty. That's the Proxy Countdown for the week of June 9th, 2025. Join us next week when we jump back into the alternative democracy pool. Forever on the lookout for shareholder shenanigans, dopey directors, scandalous CEO pay ratios, now failed attendance standards, and wayward band-aids. So many things.